Morning, TJ. Morning, Shane. See a few more people trickling in, but we are going to get started right now. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Salem Chamber and our monthly Business Advocacy Committee meeting. The crowd pours in at the last minute. Great to see everybody here. Thank you for being there, and thank you, those of you online and watching virtually. It is a special morning as we get a recap of both the national and statewide elections, and we've brought in two experts to do exactly that today. Tuesday night was, on the national stage, quite a spectacle to watch. A lot of change, obviously, that we saw about our country, and we will hear from Chris Eyler, who's the Vice President with the United States Chamber. I'd like to have it also known that joining him is colleague J.L. Wilson, of course, and know that both of these individuals recently spoke at our Oregon State Chamber Convention, did a great job bringing updates to our members, and we thought it would be fantastic to have these two experts come in and preview what occurred on Tuesday night. So with that, we'd like to start with Chris Eyler from the U.S. Chamber to preview our federal recap.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Again, as Tom said, my name is Chris Eyler. I am the U.S. Chamber's Vice President for the Northwest region. What that means is my job is to work with Tom, Jameson, and their colleagues at the state and local chambers all across Oregon, as well as Washington, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, on our public policy and political priorities. When I agreed to do this, I was a little apprehensive because I wasn't sure I would have anything clear to update you on today. But we actually have a lot more clarity than I was expecting, and I think a lot of people were expecting at this point. So first of all, I am not a pollster. I'm not going to try and dive into exit polling and give you all sorts of data points. That's not my area of expertise. But there is going to be a lot over the next couple of days, weeks, and months on what happened on Tuesday. And I'll likely be able to get into that in a little more detail when I likely come back early in the year next year to talk about our priorities. But there is one thing I do want to point out that I think really kind of explains what we saw happen on Tuesday. And that is this chart that I've been using in pretty much all of my presentations over the past 2 years that shows where Americans see the direction of the country. By a margin of nearly 2-to-1, Americans for multiple years now have said the country is on the wrong direction. And when you have numbers like that, those are not numbers that a sitting administration or an incumbent vice president can really overcome. Americans just simply are not happy right now, be it inflation, cost of housing, what's going on with immigration, you name it. Americans are just very, very sour right now, and I think that one point really explains what happened, because what we saw happen on Tuesday is President Trump outperformed the numbers that President Biden did in 2020. He won Latino voters. Abortion was not the issue that Democrats thought it was. He improved his position across pretty much every demographic group. And again, I think that is largely because people just are sour about the direction of the country. So what does this mean for Congress? I'm not going to really get into the presidential race because I think that's being well covered right now in the news. So I'm going to focus mostly on Congress. So where we stand right now is that it looks like Republicans are going to take control. They are going to take control of the Senate, and they very well could take control of the House, though there are still a number of seats outstanding in the House. In the Senate, Republicans have flipped control from the Democrats. Democrats had a 51-49 majority in the 118th Congress. That is going to be at least 52 Republicans going into the 119th. There are still 3 seats to be determined. Those are in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada. And right now, of those 3 that have yet to be called, the Republican in Pennsylvania, McCormick, is leading, and most prognosticators feel that he's going to eke out a win and likely be the next senator from Pennsylvania. And then when the last I looked in Arizona and Nevada, the 2 Democratic candidates were ahead, Gallego and Rosen in Nevada. what this, as far as what we can expect out of the U.S. Senate, I think the Senate's going to operate. It's not going to operate like the House and be as crazy partisan as what we've seen over the past 2 years. But it's still going to be a lot more conservative than what we have seen in recent years. And I think we're going to get our first tell about how things are going to be in the Senate moving forward next week when they come back into session and hold their leadership elections. On the Democratic side, there's not much drama. It's well expected that the current majority leader, Chuck Schumer, will in all likelihood continue on as the minority leader in the next Congress. And Dick Durbin, the whip, will continue on as the minority whip in the next Congress. However, Senator McConnell, after serving as the longest Republican leader in history, is stepping aside, and Republicans will have to vote in a new majority. Right now, there are 3 candidates: Senator John Thune from South Dakota, Senator John Cornyn from Texas, and Senator Rick Scott from Florida. The conventional wisdom is that the likely victor is going to be one of the 2 Johns. Both John Thune and John Cornyn are close allies of Mitch McConnell. They have both Senator Thune currently serves as the Republican whip, and Senator Cornyn was the whip before Senator Thune. And they are both very close to, like I said, both very close to Senator McConnell. Senator Scott is a bit of a wild card here. He is running on a campaign to decentralize power of leadership and is being backed by some of the more far-right members of the Senate. Again, everyone right now expects that it will be either Thune or Cornyn, but the wild card here is whether or not President-elect Trump will try to put his thumb on the scales here and influence this election. I'm skeptical that will happen, and even if it did, that it would be effective. Senators do not like to be told what to do, and they do cherish their independence. And also, Senator Thune and Senator Cornyn are both very well liked across the caucus, and so I suspect that conventional wisdom will play out, and it will either be Thune or Cornyn. As for the whip, there is no race. The current number 3 Republican in the Senate, Senator Barrasso from Wyoming, is running unopposed, and with that, in all likelihood, unless there's a last-minute candidacy, become the next Senate whip. In the House, there's still a lot to be sorted out. Right now, Republicans have the majority, 220 to 213. And they are currently ahead in the number of races called, 205 to 190. And there are roughly 40 seats to still be called. One of those seats that still needs to be called is here in Oregon. It is the Oregon 5th Congressional District, currently occupied by Republican Lori Chavez-DeRemer. JL and I were just talking about it, and it does not appear as if she's going to be able to overcome her current deficit to Janelle Bynum. But we've seen stranger things happen, so time will tell. There's 2 other races in the Northwest that also have yet to be called, just across the river in Washington State. Democratic Representative Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez is currently running ahead of Republican Joe Kent. And then in Alaska, Democratic Congresswoman Mary Peltola is currently in a ranked choice situation with Republican Nick Begich. She is right now behind in the vote tallying, but a lot of the outstanding vote is from the very rural Alaska Native areas of the state. And she is an Alaska Native herself. So it's expected that she will close that gap somewhat. The thing about Alaska, again, to remember is that it is a ranked choice state. So if no candidate gets over 50% in the general election, then it goes to ranked choice, a ranked choice process. As for your delegation, right now, as I said, the 5th congressional district still has yet to be determined. But what is notable to me about your congressional delegation is just how junior it will now be in Congress. Senator Wyden, of course, will continue on as the senior Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, and Senator Merkley will be a fairly senior member now on the Senate Appropriations Committee, which incidentally is one of the few areas where we have seen some pretty good bipartisan cooperation over the past 2 years. But the rest of your delegation on the House side, other than Susan Bonamici, every single member of your delegation has been elected since the year 2020. This is notable because at one point in not too distant past, your delegation consisted of either the ranking or chair of the Finance Committee, the ranking or chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, or the ranking or chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Now, Senator Wyden will be the only person in a position of committee leadership in your delegation. So what does this all mean? First of all, they have to go back and finish all the work that they didn't finish before they adjourned on September 30th. And they have only 20 days while they are both the House and Senate are going to be in session to get that work done. What they need to get done is first and foremost, finish funding the government for fiscal year 2025. Before they adjourned in September, they were unable to complete all 12 appropriations bills by the end of the fiscal year. So they passed a continuing resolution that continued to fund the government until December 20th. They need to either pass another continuing resolution to fund the government to some point in time in 2025, or they need to pass a full year omnibus appropriations bill. Given the outcome of the election, my guess is they will do another continuing resolution and allow the new Congress and the new administration to sort things out and fund the government for the rest of 2025 once they're sworn in January. They also need to complete work on the National Defense Authorization Act. This is the bill that authorizes all the programs at the Pentagon. It is a bill that has passed every single year for the past 65 years, and I seriously doubt that this Congress wants to be the first Congress to not get its work done on that bill. They also need to either extend the Farm Bill yet again, or they need to pass a new Farm Bill reauthorization. The Farm Bill, of course, it's not just farm programs, it's also all nutrition programs that are run through the Department of Agriculture. And then, as I said, they will need to sort out their leadership going into the next Congress. So as far as what to expect from the new Congress, there's a lot of questions right now. Even though it looks as if Republicans could very well have unified control of government, the White House, Senate, and House, they are still going to have extremely narrow majorities in both the House and Senate. And there are some even suggesting that the majority in the House could be only a matter of 2 to 3 seats. That's a majority in name only, particularly with this Republican conference, which has shown over the past 2 years that they have struggled to stay on the same page as a conference. But we will have some early flashpoints that are going to give us a good sense of how things are going to play out with this Congress and this president. Starting with the fact that in early 2025, we will once again hit the statutory debt limit. Now, that doesn't mean once they hit it, we can no longer keep spending. The Department of Treasury can work its accounting magic and do what they refer to as extraordinary measures and keep spending money. But in the past, when they have had to do that they've usually been able to stretch things out for another 6 to 8 months. But at some point between January and summer, Congress is going to have to deal once again with raising the debt ceiling. Now, again, you would think with unified control of government, they would be able to clear this very easily, and they very well may. But there are a number of members, particularly amongst House Republicans, that are very, very adamant about not raising the debt ceiling. And if their majority is as narrow as some are predicting it could be, this process could be very difficult once again. And then it may become a question of whether a Speaker Johnson has to turn to his Democratic colleagues to get enough votes to pass a debt ceiling increase. Next, they're also going to have to deal with the expiration of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And I'm going to get to that in more detail in a second. But that, again, is another point where you could see some disagreement amongst Republicans. largely because there are, as I already said, there's a number of Republicans, particularly on the House side, who are deficit hawks. And as much as they like tax cuts, they are more adamant about not increasing the debt. And then finally, as I said, the appropriations process is likely going to continue to be very difficult, even with unified control of government. So in light of this reality, then it becomes a question of, are we going to continue to see the new administration do what we've seen every administration for the past 25 years do and become very, very aggressive in pushing their policy priorities through the regulatory process? With unified control of government, President-elect Trump will likely try to do as much as he can legislatively, but he has expressed frustration with that process in the past, and it's quite possible that you're going to see just as much aggressive regulating going on, or deregulating as the case may be, as you are seeing right now with the Biden administration. Related to that is the fact that Senate Republicans, even though they will have the majority, they will not have a filibuster-proof majority. And there are a number of things that they can push through with a simple majority: nominations, reconciliation bills, which is what they'll likely have to use to pass a tax extension. But other pieces of legislation are going to be subject to filibusters, and you need 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. And they are looking at having roughly 53 or 54 Republican senators. So to pass anything, they are going to still need bipartisan votes. President-elect Trump, in his first term, was frequently trying to put pressure on Senate Republicans to do away with the filibuster. Senator McConnell and a number of Republicans resisted this. The U.S. Chamber was supportive of McConnell in this. We do not feel that the filibuster should go away. We feel that the presence of the filibuster makes for more robust, durable, long-lasting legislative solutions. So we don't want to see the Senate become just a mirror image of the House in the way it operates. But the Senate has changed. Senator McConnell will no longer be the leader. And it's very possible that President-elect Trump will be again trying to put pressure on Senate Republicans to do away with the filibuster. Next, how will states respond? I think this is very relevant for us out here in the Pacific Northwest, because as we saw during the first Trump administration, states like Washington, Oregon, California, New York acted fairly aggressively to counter things that they disapproved of happening in the Trump administration. Their attorneys generals all frequently brought lawsuits against the federal government. So it's likely we're going to start to see a lot of that again. And then lastly, one of the things that's, I don't think, really getting a lot of attention in all the press coverage is that President-elect Trump is going to go into office as a lame duck presidency. And it's not abundantly clear how that's going to impact the legislative process moving forward. There are already plenty of Democrats and plenty of Republicans beginning to position themselves for 2028. And that will have an impact on the ability of Congress and the president to get their agenda done over the next 4 years. So stay tuned. Then lastly, as far as the U.S. Chamber's agenda, this is something I discussed when I was here earlier this year. Our top priority going to this Congress is going to be the extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. A lot of this bill has already expired. Some of it is some of it's expired, some of it's beginning to phase out now, but the bulk of it expires at the end of 2025. This includes all the individual rate cuts, the higher standard deduction, and many of the business tax deductions that we fought very hard to get put into place back in 2017. One of those deductions is the so-called 20% pass-through deduction. This is a deduction that was created specifically for small businesses to make sure that small businesses were not put at a tax disadvantage to large businesses when they also lowered the corporate tax rate. Here in Oregon, 54% of employment at for-profit private sector businesses is at pass-through entities that take advantage of this deduction. And it has meant a nearly $2.3 billion tax benefit to businesses in this state. And again, that tax deduction expires. One of the tax provisions that does not expire, but we should treat it as if it is on the negotiating table, is the corporate rate reduction. That rate reduction to 21% was made permanent, but we are viewing this negotiation as everything's going to possibly be on the table. Even with Republicans in control of government, there is going to be all sorts of pressure to not lower rates on upper income individuals and to not maintain such a low corporate rate. So we want to make sure that we are educating members about the importance of keeping the rate at 21%. So for here in Oregon, when taxes go up on businesses, they pass that expense on to their customers, their workers, and their shareholders in the form of lower wages, higher costs, and lower returns on shareholders. And we estimate for here in Oregon, over a 10-year period of time, an increase from 21% to 28% would result in $5.9 billion in higher prices for Oregon consumers, $2.6 billion in lower wages for Oregon workers, and $2.1 billion in lower returns for Oregon shareholders. So for a total hit to Oregon of just over $10.8 billion. Your senior senator, Senator Wyden, is going to be in a very key position as the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee. The Finance Committee has jurisdiction over all tax policy, entitlement programs, and international trade. He likely is not going to want to extend the tax bill, but he needs to be hearing from you. He needs to be hearing that if the tax rates go up, if these deductions go away, it will be have a negative impact on Oregon. So I understand how frustrating it is dealing with your congressional delegation, but that doesn't mean you can let them off the hook. You need to let them know about these things. We need your help educating them on the importance of this. Even if they're going to vote no, they need to be hearing from you, and they need to explain their position and why they're doing something that could harm businesses here in the state. Beyond the tax bill, I don't know. We will continue to do everything we have been doing for the past decade in terms of advocating for pro-growth policies, such as reducing the regulatory burden on businesses, trying to address the worker shortage that we are seeing across the country in every single sector, at every single business, and then doing what we can to open international markets to American businesses overseas. Some of that will be easier than others, particularly when it comes to workforce. Our solution there has always been to reform our broken immigration system to allow more legal immigration. Obviously, the political environment is going to be a lot more difficult to get that done. Likewise with international trade. The incoming administration, as with the outgoing administration, has been very hostile to our position on trade agreements and more liberalized trade. But we will continue to make that case, and we will be looking to you for help in making that case, because, as I've said a million times, we have no problem getting meetings with your delegation, but your delegation wants to know what you are thinking and what their constituents back home are thinking. So anything you all can do to help us carry that message to DC is tremendously helpful and will be gratefully appreciated. So that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chris, for that presentation. I'd like to open it up to the audience. Yes, Randy.
What are your thoughts? Federal agency. What are your thoughts? You see things. What are you thinking?
So I think you're talking about this plan to reclassify senior civil service. I mean,
what do you perceive the regulatory agencies? They're minimized, or is it enough?
I think it's too early to say. So going back to my point about whether or not the Trump administration will be aggressive as far as regulating, I do think they're going to come in and immediately look at everything that the Biden administration has done and try to undo as much as they can. I think one of the kind of X factors here is how the Loper Bright decision from the summer that did away with Chevron deference, how is that going to impact their ability to, A, undo what the Biden administration did, and B, be aggressive regulating moving forward. They may find that they're not able to do what they were able to do in the first Trump administration as easily as they like to now, because the court has instructed lower courts to no longer give as much deference to agency interpretations.
Ruth?
In his first administration, President Trump leveraged the small business advocates with the SBA to kind of fulfill a mandate that was in an executive order to reduce regulation, for every regulation to had to go. And they were able to achieve largely those numbers.
Yeah.
That you anticipate he's going to do that again.
Yeah,
it seems like that would work.
I would anticipate that, things like that, they will probably continue to go back to trying to do again. I think a lot of the uncertainty, though, is that, there were a lot of people when they left the Trump administration the first time that have been very, very vocal in their frustration with, to put it diplomatically, their frustration with former President Trump. They have all sorts of personnel that they are not going to bring back. And so it's unclear who is going to fill a lot of these. A lot of the people that you would be usual suspects to fill a lot of these positions, they may have removed themselves from consideration already. So it's hard to determine who's going to be filling a lot of these positions moving forward. So there's a lot of X factors with respect to the agency side of things right now.
I'll piggyback on the agency question, Chris. I had the opportunity to travel to kind of an air summit for recruiting air service into various communities. Myself and past President DeHart traveled to that, and it was noted in the presentation that they gave us two scenarios, one if Harris won the election and one if Trump. And it was noted that all agency heads have been essentially notified that they would be replaced should Trump. And so the aviation group really didn't have, from a federal level, a way to talk to us about what the future looked like, because they realized they may not even be in that position come January. When you have that type of atmosphere occurring at the head of agencies level, how do we as the general public being served really know? Is it more of a crapshoot, or is this something the U.S. Chamber is really strategically kind of seeing who is going to be coming into those key positions?
So, we are going through that process now. And, we are communicating with the transition team as much as we can at this point. And, we are doing what we can to make suggestions to influence the process. But right now, it is too early to really say with any, certainty, what's going to happen. The first Trump administration, the filling those positions took months, and I worked with a number of chambers on their DC fly-in, and they had in the past typically gotten meetings with administration officials, and there weren't people in those positions to meet with. I don't know if we're going to see a repeat of that this time. His team has a little better sense of what they're doing now than they did back in 2016, 2017. But again, this is a situation that has only happened once before, where President Cleveland in the 19th century won a second non-consecutive term. So this is uncharted territory.
Can't imagine, I know you're being very diplomatic here, but I can't imagine that's an easy task for the U.S. Chamber to try and keep their arms around. Other questions for Chris Eyler? Yes, past President Miller.
I think I generally know, but I'd be interested in you stating what exactly the chamber would be advocating from the administration to do as it relates to immigration.
So our position, all of the employment-based visa programs are pretty antiquated. The immigration system has not been comprehensively overhauled since the 80s. And there are plenty of programs that allow businesses to bring workers into the country when they cannot find available workers. They can bring workers in to fill those positions. Those visa programs do not let enough people in. They are too bureaucratic. They're too expensive for both the businesses and the immigrants. They need to be modernized. They need to be made more responsive to the needs of employers when employers need those workers, and so they can get them in more easily. A lot of the reason you see so many people entering illegally is because the process of coming in legally is so complicated, so bureaucratic, it takes forever. So you need to reform those visa programs. You need to give the federal agencies the personnel and resources they need to process those applications. The government is experiencing the same worker shortages that the private sector is. They don't have enough administrative law judges. They don't have enough foreign service officers to do the initial interviews with these individuals who want to come in. So, we need to reform the visa programs. We need to give the agencies the resources they need to process these individuals. We need to give certainty to individuals who are here under DACA or temporary protected status. They are in legal limbo. They were brought here as children. They've been given status to stay legally, but they don't necessarily have a path to citizenship. That was a process that was done administratively, and it's something that the incoming administration could undo very quickly.
Follow up.
Yeah, would it be accurate to say that the chamber is favored of a secure border?
Yes, and I was about to get to that. Any immigration package also has to address the border. And we were supportive of the bill that was put forward earlier this year, the compromise bill. It provided a lot of the resources that we think need to be directed at the southern border in terms of physical and electronic barriers, giving the agencies the personnel and resources they need to staff up. Right now, Border Patrol doesn't have enough personnel.
It's disappointing to hear that, but I appreciate your answer.
Representative Morgreen.
Thank you for the information tonight. I want to drill down just a little bit on the workforce. You mentioned early on that part of getting immigration set straight is to take care of our workforce issues. So is it that Americans who are here, who are employable, are not working? Or do we really have fewer Americans to be working? I know that the pandemic, wreaked havoc on a lot of that. But I'm just curious as to if that comment that we need, and I know we've always needed it.
Yeah, well, this is an issue we were seeing prior to the pandemic. I think we really started talking about this 2016, 2017, 2018, where our members were telling us they just couldn't find enough workers, but more specifically, they couldn't find workers with the skills they needed. So there is a skills piece to this. We need to do a better job of giving workers the skills they need. We need to make sure that the workforce training system is better aligned with what employers need. But it doesn't matter if we don't have enough people trained. And as I said, we were seeing this prior to the pandemic. The pandemic just accelerated it. You also have baby boomers retiring at a pretty rapid rate. And so people are just leaving the workforce. There are some issues with people have decided I think the pandemic we saw a lot of two-income families decide that they could get by on one income. You're also seeing a lot of people not coming back to the workforce because they can't find affordable childcare. So childcare is a piece of this as well.
Mr. Eyler, past President Sullivan.
Yeah, my favorite Trump program that Democrats seem to have raised is opportunity centers. I got asked to participate in identifying new opportunity zones in the Salem area. I'm just curious, is that something that you see as being an effective tool that could be embraced by Democrats in Oregon?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I can tell you, no, they'd be cut immediately if there wasn't some pressure to keep them.
Okay, any final questions for Mr. Eyler? Yes,
I
Ruth?
just had a follow-up question on the opportunity zones. Are there any numbers about what the total investment was in that program? Because it was kind of quickly. And
I don't have that on.
Do some follow-up with you, Ruth, possibly Chris, through your office. Yeah, may not be immediate, but we will circle back on that. Okay, would you join me in thanking Chris Eyler for doing how this relationship, not all chambers of commerce in Oregon choose to be members of the U.S. Chamber, either for financial considerations or policy-wise, depending on what they take action on. Our organization is very proud to be a paying member of the U.S. Chamber and have done so for well over 40 years. I think it's really important. Chris travels down from the Seattle market to come join us and has committed to joining us quarterly and brings very, very good information to the table. And Chris, I just want to personally thank you for your involvement. You've been fantastic, not just to this organization, but to chambers across Oregon. And I appreciate how you address chambers that don't invest necessarily with the U.S. Chamber and still do that work, because that's exactly what we do. We don't have every single business in our city as a member here, but we will always be working on their behalf. I'd like to transition now to an expert in the field, and that is Eyler Wilson, who is a principal at the Public Affairs Council. Eyler also serves as our executive director of the Oregon State Chamber. Eyler is recognized as an expert in the space of both political consulting, as well as understanding the dynamics of leadership changes in our state, and has been very involved with the State House. So Eyler, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Tom. Let me start off just with some basics. Oregon has normalized slow, laborious, unworkable elections. So we don't even know. I can tell you right now, turnout as of yesterday morning for a presidential election is at 69%, which is absurdly low. We don't know how many ballots have come in since. I am expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.25 million ballots. It's my best guess. To date, about 1.8 million have been counted. So by my rough back of the envelope guess, I think that there's still 500,000 ballots still to be tabulated and counted. Fortunately, I don't think there's going to be much we learn from those 500,000 ballots, because I don't think that there are that many races hanging in the balance. However, I think that there might be one, and that is the congressional race that Chris alluded to in CD5. Typically, it used to be 20 years ago where low turnout elections were very favorable to Republican candidates. That is no longer the case. Low turnout elections, your typical high propensity voter in Oregon now is a Democrat voter. And so Republicans would have needed significant turnout in order to be competitive in this election cycle. So if we're somewhere in the low 70s, that's just not going to work if you're a Republican candidate. For Democrats, the cycle, I can tell you right now, I think they let their foot off the gas. I think the Democrats easily could have picked up seats that I think they elected not to. I'll go into a little bit of that chess match as we progress. But the environment overall, I think, was as you know, with the benefit of hindsight, probably more advantageous for Democrat candidates, even though there appeared to be a red wave in most parts of the country. So with I think I can generally summarize the elections in Oregon as the Oregon that you woke up on Tuesday morning is the same Oregon that you woke up with on Wednesday morning. And typically you're looking at elections as that one moment in time where trajectory could change in any way because the people change. The people are not going to change. So anything, and I'm not saying change for better or worse, it just didn't change. Nobody lost. No incumbent in the legislature actually lost. So everything that we went in with is the same thing that we're coming out with. So let's talk a little bit about the legislature. I think we all knew going in that regardless of how things shook out, just by way of how the seats are arranged, that Democrats would pick up one seat. Currently, it's a 17-13 Democrat majority. I think we all felt that it was going to be 18-12, no matter how good the cycle was going to be, potentially for Republicans, that it was going to be 18-12 because the one seat that was going to flip was a Central Oregon seat that historically had been Republican. Through the process of redistricting and whatnot, the boundaries were changed in a way to favor Democrat candidates, and it worked out according to plan. So so Tim Knopp, who was the longtime Republican caucus leader out of Central Oregon, that seat flipped to a gentleman named Anthony Broadman, who I think we all feel that we can work with. But he is the 18th member of the Democratic caucus. No other seats changed. I know Republicans were very interested in a seat on the coast with a senator named Dick Anderson out of Lincoln City. My contention is the Democrats just chose not to go after that because had they wanted to, I think they very easily could have. Conversely, there's a seat up in East Multnomah County. I think Republicans felt that there was a strong opportunity to make inroads with the working class voters in that East Multnomah County, and turned out it was fool's gold for them. So the incumbent, a gentleman named Chris Gorsuch, easily prevailed, probably around 55-45. So the Senate is largely the same. It went from a 17-13 Democrat majority to an 18-12. Functionally, from a policy perspective, I don't think it's going to make that much difference anyway with respect to the type of policies that come out of the Senate. I still think you've got enough moderating influences in the Senate, or the policy is going to look generally the same. I know a lot of people are invested in this notion of a supermajority. I have typically found that the supermajority is not that important anymore because through legislative interpretation, manipulation, court decisions, what constitutes a tax for purposes of raising revenue has a very, very limited definition now. And so things that used to fall under the rubric of, well, it needs a supermajority to pass, not so much anymore. There's a lot of revenue raising that can now pass through the legislature with simple majorities as opposed to supermajorities. So let's set aside the Senate. We'll go to the House. The House is going to stay completely the same. I don't think one person is going to change seats. There are a few close races. They're all the downside risk right now is with the Republican candidates. I don't see any Democrat candidates who are threatened, even though we've got 500,000 ballots left. I just don't see anything that would lead me to believe that somebody who's out of the ballgame now is suddenly going to get competitive with all these ballots hanging out. Those trajectories tend to endure throughout the whole release of ballots. The two Republicans that I think it could get interesting are Tracy Kramer. here in North Salem up to Woodburn. She's up by about 550 votes. That is an extraordinarily small district. It was designed to be geographically small and from a population perspective, very small, because it was designed to be a minority majority district with mostly a Hispanic. That district has really shifted. So that is not, is not really the gimme for Democrats that it used to be. And Tracy has just, I think, done an exceptional job there. I don't think, to be very clear, I don't think new ballots are going to change that dynamic. I'm just saying numerically, it appears very close. The other, ironically, is the House Republican leader, and I think that he felt that he was safer than he actually was. And he has got a seat that really encompasses Hood River County and some outlying areas of Multnomah, Clackamas, and Wasco. And boy, those initial ballot drops sure would have given me pause about my strategy when the initial drop showed that he was down by a couple hundred votes. Typically, the vote in that goes more right as more vote comes in. So, you know, as I checked my app this morning, he was ahead by about 300 votes. No, but it was actually about 600. And I actually expect that to extend. So I don't think there's going to be a single change in the House of Representatives. Every competitive race that the Republicans wanted to pick up, and I mean, almost without fail, ended up in a 55-45 Democrat win. Democrats, I could tell you about 3 weeks ago, took their foot off the gas on all the races where they had an opportunity to pick up Republican seats. On the North Coast, here in Salem with Kevin Mannix, Tracy Kramer, and even the race I just alluded to, that close one up in Hood River County, I can tell that they all moved their money out of those races. So they either saw something in polling that told them that their incumbents were actually threatened, or they may have just said, we're gonna wait till a midterm election to, you know, when there's typically an anti-incumbent, and that's really going to be a reflection of the federal administration, when an anti-incumbent sentiment might lead us to just clean up the playing field. And so they may have just held back. I don't know. But they took their foot off the gas on all those opportunities. And so you've got a legislature, at least on the House side, 35-25. If the supermajority matters to you, then you've got at least one chamber now that is not in a supermajority position, because the Democrats would have needed to pick up a seat to be in a supermajority. So that may give the Republicans some leverage on revenue conversations. There's going to be conversations about a renewal of the hospital tax. There's going to be a transportation that invariably will include some sort of fuel tax or some. So Republicans will have some leverage on these revenue discussions. And typically leverage on revenue discussions has downstream effects on policy, because Republicans will say, well, I'll give you that 36th vote for that revenue, but I need X, Y, and Z to do that. And so that's why it generally has some forcing function on how critical policy gets put into play. So, I mean, I guess it's probably of some marginal benefit, but the House will look the exact same, no changes. There are some okay facets of that, because I think there's an emerging caucus within the Democrat caucus that is very independent, free thinking. Some might say moderate, some might say open to business. So it's not what we've experienced in the House, you know, 4-6 years ago when Speaker Kotek at the time, who's now our governor, when she was the speaker and she marshaled the forces, and man, we got tire tracked all the time. I think that this is going to be a slightly different House, with a little more freedom and a little more independence of thought. So it could work out all right. We'll see, but you know, I don't go into it feeling like there are predetermined outcomes on a lot of these measures. I feel like there will be some real deliberation and give and take. So set the legislature aside. Let's talk about the ballot measures. Measure 118 failed miserably. I don't know what to say there. Obviously, I think we all celebrate that because it was seen as just an untenable tax on any number of our businesses to fund a universal basic income program. At an 80-20, you start to wonder, wow, that was a lot of money spent on an 80-20 result, and could we have done it differently? Not my question to solve. But I often wonder, boy, that some of those resources would have sure been nice in some of the races, but it is what it is. You take the win. I learned from Jerry Jones that there's no such thing as overpaying for a win. So you got the win. I think the best outcome of the night really was the failure of the ranked choice voting. Thank God. That was, if anybody had access to a Portland ballot, and what a hot mess that was. And I thought, boy, what a disaster that you do a localized ranked choice with your biggest voting population in the state, so they could see firsthand what a dumpster fire it was before casting an election on a statewide. Wow, tactically, what an unbelievable blunder. But thank goodness that was by far the best outcome of the night, because something that Chris illustrated with Alaska, you could get into a situation where the winner is not the winner. And I guarantee if you think being in Oregon is tough now, wait until the winner's not the winner on election night. And so that to me is the one that was I would say the most pleasant surprise of the evening. On the congressional races, well, I have to confess, I took a little bit of delight on the Compensation Commission failing, because I thought that was a very sneaky, underhanded way for legislators to bake in basically making a professional class. And knowing how that bill passed, and let's just say I'm pleased with the outcome. So on the congressional races, the race was CD5 between Lori and Janelle. I just don't know where the remaining ballots are going to come from. If you told me that the big chunk of the ballots are going to come from East Marion County and Lynn County, and then I would say Lori could probably make up 7,000 votes. If you told me it's going to come from Lake Oswego and those parts of Clackamas, then I'm going to say nah. Right now, I don't think that there's enough to get Lori over the top. It might tighten, but I think that that's going to be a flip. Again, don't quote me on that. I just knows over time that if you come out of the gate with a 7,000 vote lead, that is largely substantial enough to get to stand the test. It could tighten, but my gut tells me I think we probably know the outcome there. So that's the only thing that I see really as a race that could still yet have a change in outcome, but my gut tells me I think we know. One thing I'm interested in, just as I have the benefit of hindsight, one benefit of that highly contested congressional race and Measure 118 is it made the cost of television so expensive that it really it blunted out all the typical ads you would have seen for a lot of in this case, it's going to be Democratic candidates, because the most expensive media market's the Portland media market. Most of the races that were in question are up and down I-205. As it cuts to the south and the east of Portland. And that really changed a lot of strategy, because so much of strategy depends on Democrat candidates leveraging their cash advantages on network TV, particularly in the Portland media market. And they were not able to do that because the cost became so prohibitively high, and the only people that could afford it were the Marie Gluesenkamp, Janelle Bynum, and Measure 118. And so you had a lot of that TV money and TV airtime sucked up that really changed strategy. I think that is one of the reasons, kind of indirectly, why Democrats were not able to press their advantage so much, but it was just one of those dynamics in retrospect that I just thought was interesting. And you don't realize how these campaigns are a chess game. And so much of it depends on what are your advertising mediums that are available to you? Are they affordable? And if they're not, what other modes do you employ? And so it really forced different types of campaigns overall. The last thing I will say is I marvel at the chart that Chris showed that talked about sort of this right track, wrong track, where just a high dissatisfaction there was with quality of life, where the direction of the country, and how that manifests in electoral outcomes throughout the state. That chart should have been the Oregon chart. It was the Oregon chart. The dissatisfaction with quality of life in Oregon is through the roof. It's the highest level of dissatisfaction that I have ever polled. It was in most of these districts that were supposed to be competitive. Is my quality of life better or worse? It was typically my quality of life is worse 60% plus in all of these districts, and not one person paid a price. Not one person. And it really, I'm just going to leave you with that. It was the actual kind of gut feeling that things are terribly off the track in this state had no effects whatsoever on people's voting habits, voting behaviors. I suspect it's because, I suspect it's because Republicans are so inept at turning out voters that the low propensity who is more likely to feel that way just simply sat it out. I think that's what you're going to find. And so your high propensity voter in Oregon today is a Democrat 404, which means they participate in every election. And that is the evolving nature of the Oregon electorate. And I think we saw that manifest. So it was an interesting election cycle, but nothing changed. So again, I go back to the fact that the same Oregon you had on Tuesday morning is the same one you've got on Wednesday morning, and life goes on.
Jail's got a very colorful way of presenting that we always enjoy. Jail, when you present, I always have our members come to me and just say, bring Jail in. So great job. Let's open the floor up for questions for Mr. Wilson. Amy, please.
Knowing, and I hear the complaining in my industry about life in Oregon, and a lot of people are leaving, one of the highest migration states.
Sure.
So knowing that, what sort of strategy do you think needs to be adopted to turn this around? It sounds like we got a lot of people whining and that they're not connecting their dots.
You're going to wind me up. Well, okay. So you've got an unbelievably unbalanced and tilted election apparatuses. You've got largely a Democrat apparatus that relies on foot soldiers that are let's say they come from labor. They've got an endless supply of money. The Republicans, if you're saying that the quality, the policy is downstream from the people that you elect, it's an uncompetitive environment. So I am beyond the fact that thinking money is the thing anymore. Because the one thing I do know is that Republicans are now specializing in these AstroTurf campaigns that don't work. You dump lots of money into districts, mailers, whatever. It's always too late. You don't set the hook. You don't motivate people. And you know, we do another postmortem where we said the same thing 20 straight sides, you know, 20 straight years. I'm looking at, you know, what is the thing that changes the dynamic? Well, you've got to organize and motivate human beings. And so to me, if I'm looking at what worked, like what worked federally that we don't have in Oregon, well, look at where the registration trends were going in all these states prior to Tuesday. When you look at all these registration gaps that were closing and closing hard, Pennsylvania, concerted efforts, North Carolina, concerted efforts. So you need people that are organized and motivated to do that. You're going to hear names pop up in Republican circles, people like Scott Pressler, people, organizations like Turning Point, where they organize actual human beings. They go out, they get registrations, they motivate, they create community, and they take responsibility for those ballots and making sure people vote and all of that apparatus. And Oregon, I would say at this stage is very consultant driven, which means it's just a revenue stream for consultants. Somebody's going to have to do the work. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Thank you, Amy, for that question. Other questions for Mr. Wilson? Yes, Tom.
I found it interesting that Trump organization didn't even say to have anything about Donald Trump in the Oregon election. Yeah. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. And so that is one aspect where Oregon was sort of left on its own because you didn't even get a touch point of a presidential campaign paying for a voter's pamphlet statement. So I would read into that what you will. Yes.
I think they left one out election before.
Probably. Yeah, I don't know.
I was not shocked at all, actually, Tom. So we're not a playground state at all.
Okay, I was shocked to me.
I was too. Because to me, it's the minimum amount of due diligence to be competitive. It's because everybody knows that the voter's pamphlet is the one thing that we all look at. I mean, even if you round file every piece of mail that you get from a campaign, the one thing that I will read is the voter's pamphlet, the arguments, just so I am familiar with the argumentation. And I could not believe that.
Vice President Miller.
So, you know, I remember a couple of decades ago, the Bush-Gore election, and, you know, coming down to a couple of votes in the state of Florida. And then you look at where Florida is today, in terms of being a reliable, business-friendly, conservative state. Is that simply a matter of a whole bunch of conservative voters moving to that state, or has that state actually changed the mindset of its electorate? And is there anything to be learned and applied to Oregon?
I view it as a function of somebody won an election, and then you had actually competent executive leadership. And the executive leadership, it's a virtuous cycle. I am in this case, yes. And so you have executive leadership that works, the stuff works, and it attracts more competent leadership. And to me, it's a virtuous cycle that builds on itself. To me, Oregon is in a different situation that feels less like building and more like a spiral because, you know, things don't work. And but if nobody pays a consequence for things not working, then things will continue to not work. There's no incentive to make them work. And that's the frustration I have.
Follow up.
Yes, John?
I pick this up in drips and drabs, so if I say something that's inaccurate, correct me. But I hear that protest not particularly popular. Does that mean anything? Because, you know, I guess I wonder, based on your comment, is there a chance that governor's election that can get that first win and get a competent person in, and we can start that spiral? It's very.
I think Governor Kotek's going to be extraordinarily formidable. Extraordinarily. And so, because I think that she could credibly claim that she got things going in a better direction. And I think that she's also going to have the benefit of running in a cycle that is going to be a midterm, which will be a referendum on the Trump administration. And typically those don't go well for whoever shares the same party affiliation as the person at the top. So I think there are a lot of built-in advantages to that. And I think it's going to be I think she's going to be a very formidable candidate in 2 years.
Additional questions for Jael? Raquel?
This is a selfish question, Jael, but I'm curious, with the apparent federal side of government going public, do you think we're going to see hyper-partisan legislation in Oregon in the name of continuing to protect Oregonians from this new administration, what they find?
Totally. And I'm concerned because I thought that we were blessed in the Attorney General's race to have two very good candidates. I really have high regard for Dan Rayfield. I have very high regard for Will Lathrop. But I'm a little fearful that Dan will steer a very partisan route because he'll feel like he needs to. And I feel that will also be felt legislatively too. I'll feel that anything, no matter what comes out of that administration, there will be a reaction to do something the opposite, or to insulate Oregon from the impacts, or to the term is usually to disconnect. We want to disconnect. We feel that a lot in tax policy, but to try to whatever Oregon can do to disconnect from the federal policy, I think you're going to see probably more emphasis on that. I don't know what that will look like, but I do know it's obvious that it will be a
Jael, Charlie Kirk was mentioning on Turning Point the number of people who have relocated to states that fall more in alignment with their political beliefs, and he felt that was a part of some of the key swing states potentially getting at the national level. It made me conversely think, are we now going to become a hub for individuals across the United States who have extremely progressive policies in mind? And let's raise our hand and go to the communities like Oregon, who generally host that and play to that quite often.
Well, I don't want to get too far afield on this, but I do think that Oregon is the one state on the West Coast for which there is still an opportunity to kind of create our own destiny. I think that is reflected in, as frustrated as you might feel, I still see the numbers and I say Oregon is still the last place where I think that there's opportunity to create a state to your liking. And so there people who can move will, but there's lots of us in this room. You feel frustrated, but it's hard to divorce from your property interests, your family interests, your business interests. I mean, we just gonna pick up and move to, I mean, it's easier said than done. And so it really is an interesting question, but I do think that Oregon is a state that still can chart its own course. So I do.
Thank you for that perspective.
Activity
have you heard that's going after high schoolers or people that are graduating? I mean, how many generations have we lived under the Democrat rule here? I mean, I don't even know if I can't even think, I can't remember one.
Vicatio was your last one.
I don't remember him. I don't know how old I was. You know,
Weren't born, that's why.
so I mean, is there that people are, especially with the polling about where are we going? You know, we're on the wrong track, right? Is there a chance that, and I polled my own kids who are graduating, you know, high school, and there's a growing sentiment of like, do I even want to stay here? You know, can we get them to move over, get them to register to vote? I don't know, is there anything from a Republican standpoint, I guess, or business and conservative standpoint that can help recruit?
Well, I mean, it's such a, I don't even put like the party overlay on top of it. Like, are the jobs available? Is there, to me, there's like their basic human needs. Do you have, are jobs plentiful? Can you raise a family here? Are the schools good? All that stuff feeds in it. And if the answer is no, I mean, forget what your political philosophy is. If you can't even, if those things aren't even available, then the answer is obvious for your kids. It's regrettable, but that's the fact. So I think that the policies that allow you to have your pick of jobs, you have career satisfaction, family satisfaction, your kids are taken care of in schools, you feel safe. You live in a beautiful, I mean, those are all the things that you need to work on, I think. Yeah.
Any last question for JL? Please, TJ.
So a few years ago, we had a civil war in the state over the cat tax. And it was passed, and understanding was that it was going to go to schools and reducing class size. We haven't seen that happen, and the money, as I understand it, is still being collected, and the state's sitting on a chunk of change. Do you see that money getting infused into the schools? So we've had fellow teachers just about to go on strike. Or some of the Kaiser teachers. Do you see that money actually getting infused into the schools and the lower class size to do what it was supposed to do?
Well, keep in mind, TJ, that money is being deployed today. And so it's not like it's every deficiency that you see or perceive in the school system it includes all of that revenue now supporting the school system. So it's not like that they're sitting on a reservoir of money that can help solve problems. That money flow is baked in to what you're seeing today. So if you're seeing problems today, that means you need more money on top of what the cat tax already provides. But what you do illustrate is once I've come to learn over time, there's about a 6-year time horizon where something gets created and dedicated to something, and then it takes about 6 years for mission creep to set in. And the mission creep in this way, the cat tax, and I'll be guilty of it too, is you start looking at it for other purposes for which other than which it was designed. And it was designed to do X, and the people who passed it, put it into law to do X, they're not in the legislature anymore. The people who are there don't really have a background in it. And so they say, well, I wanted to do X and Y. Okay. And nobody's there to tell them they can't do Y because they're all gone. And then somebody said, well, I wanted to do X, Y, and Z. And now we're doing X, Y, and Z with it because and that's what you're going to see. The one thing about the cat tax is it is producing an enormous amount of money. It was projected to do, it's doing everything it was supposed to do and producing more. And so, every issue that you're seeing in these local already has the cat tax baked in. The governor is proposing an extra 500 million into the state school fund, and that's on top of all the growth in the cat tax. So I guess at some point you have to ask yourself, is it really about the money? But the reality is I think it's more likely that the cat tax will start being looked at for to satisfy other policy objectives. But I will also say the cat tax is built on a very, if you're a business person, I am not confident that the cat tax, as you know, won't get very out of control very quickly, because there are levers that the legislature can pull that do not require the 3/5 majority. That 0.57% tax rate, that is the one thing that would require a 3/5 majority. But with a simple majority, they can reduce the $1 million exclusion. With a simple majority, they can reduce your choice of 35% deduction on cost of goods sold or payroll. All of those things can be manipulated like that. And I would be there. I promise you that discussion will rear its head this session.
President Herron.
So, first of all, Chris and JL, thank you both for coming. Fantastic. This is more for JL. Locally, we're heading into a year where we've got both the school district and the city is going to be coming with their hand down from money. It's always great. Do you have a sense for statewide how both revenue operating levies performed at the ballot? Locally, we know the only one that I saw that passed was Falls City with a bond for their school district. Do you have a sense for sort of what the broader electorate is viewing, what their appetite for revenue generation looks like?
Very stingy. I also saw the one in Ben Lapine fail very significantly. I would say it's a mixed bag. The first thing I think people look at is, do you trust the district? Do you generally have a good feeling about the district? And do you think the district has done all it can with available resources and is truly in need? To me, there are too many right now. I can tell you definitively that Salem Kaiser voters are extraordinarily ornery about the money. So I am until those feelings mend, I think Salem Kaiser is going to be, I think, in a pickle, because I can tell you right now, just because the reason I can tell you this with some certainty is because I do polling for a living. So I've gauged the attitudes here. It is the most sour electorate here locally that I've ever seen. And that has downstream effects on how people, you just saw Chemeketa fail miserably. And so the Salem Kaiser Public Schools is not going to be exempt from that sentiment. And so that's why I think, because right now people can plausibly point to the state and say, hey, it's the state that should be, and that's where I think the onus is going to be on the short term. But right now there's a lot of grumpy communities, and so I think that the opportunity to pass those money measures right now doesn't feel great to me. That could heal with time.
The city's polling clearly indicated. Okay. Would you join me in thanking J.L. Wilson? J.L., we very much appreciate both of your expertise and the value you bring to not only our chamber, but chambers across the state. I wanted to give a quick election summary. We always like to look in the mirror as well. We, as far as our endorsements, we went 5-2. The two key losses are the Chemeketa bond and David Brown versus Tom Anderson. Tom Anderson retained his seat. And that 5 number is assuming that Tracy Kramer does come through. So that could have an asterisk by that. Jameson Gideon, I want to make sure to point out, is our business advocacy policy director and doing great work in this space. You may have seen our candidates questionnaire. Know that Jameson wholly put that together himself with the help of all candidates. I'd like to recognize, first of all candidates who ran for election, even those on our opposing side. I've reached out to them and thanked them for running for office. That is a very big step to do, and many of us in this room have not done it, although there are a few. Thank you for doing that. I want to preview a little bit about what we're looking at as an organization, and there is an opportunity right now. The city is currently in an RFP. So those of you in the financial and audits world, John, Kathy, and others in this room, the city is going to open an audit of their forecasting. And we very much would like to see a Salem firm take the opportunity to take that on. It should not be overly contentious. It is fact verification that they are seeking, and they are, I give the city credit, going to outside of their own organization. I will point out a little bit of troubling information, though. It is a $25,000 RFP. For perspective, we're a $1.6 million agency, and our financial review was $23,000 last year. So the thought that somebody would come in, comprehensively review the city's forecasting for about the price of a Salem Chamber review leaves me a little bit suspect of how that could be done. So it will certainly require a company that is willing to not look at necessarily all the revenue opportunities from the RFP, but rather am I willing to be helpful in the process for the city in clarifying information. The next piece of information I'd like you to be aware of is the city is going to be drawing some individuals together, and our organization has been requested to have a presence. And so certainly President Herron, myself, and our Vice President of Advocacy, Rich Duncan, will be intimate in those conversations and bringing them to our executive committee. What's a preview for May? We have a Ward 6 City Council race. What will be very interesting in City Council is from the date of the new council coming in, effectively January 1st. The actual date that they're sworn in, Councilor Matthews, is what, the 5th? 13th, pardon me. Effectively, you will have a 5-month stretch where you will have 8 city councilors. You'll have 1 mayor and 7 city councilors sitting in council positions. Ward 6 will be up for election. That is where mayor-elect to the mayorship, and that leaves Ward 6 with 2 years unfulfilled and by city charter. So that will go to an election. This organization will be deeply involved in that key election. The second will be our Salem Kaiser School District election. So be aware that candidates are being identified now in both Ward 6 as well as our 3 school board positions. As always, if you have an interest in serving, there are some geographic boundaries that we can talk to you about, but we very much like to see people from the business community continually being willing to step forward. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to connect with Jameson before departing today. He has done really important things. Dan Johnson, our staff team as well, doing great things. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say hi to Jackie and Lane back there. Katie was here previously. Our staff team is really working on all cylinders to make sure to be connecting our membership into the many engagement channels we offer. And as an organization, we put on paper just how many opportunities we meet with our membership a year. It's nearly 200 different opportunities to be present in this organization. So I love that all of you are interested in the policy end. We have many of our members who are on the conductivity and development and workforce. So this is a very dynamic organization serving you, and our volunteer 25-person board of directors thanks you for that very much. In closing, we will meet next on December 5th, and the city budget will be a key part of that. But we are also going to have the opportunity to meet our 3 new incoming city councilors who will be joining Salem City Council starting in January. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for being here, and we are. Well, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it, JL. Always. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.